Hello art friends, Melisa here, and I'm really excited to be sharing my first creative team project using Shawn Petite stencils. Fall is my favorite time of year and I had so much fun creating this fall themed wall decor. I'll be using the following stencils. Before we get started, I'd like to invite you to check out my YouTube channel. The link is over on Shawn's blog, or you can search for Paperlicious Designs. So let's get started and I'll show you how you can create this fall project for your home. I'm working on a 10 by 10 paint pouring canvas I got at Michael's. Unlike regular canvases that sink in when you press on the center, this one has a hard surface. I started by covering the board with one of my favorite pieces of collage paper from Shawn's collection. It's already distressed looking, so I didn't have to add anything else to the background. After adhering the paper to the front of the canvas, I flipped it over and trimmed the excess off around the edges with an X-Acto knife. You have to be careful when you do this though. You want to make sure you don't cut your canvas. I used the spring wreath stencil and a charcoal pencil to create some guidelines to build a vine type wreath. After I sketched out the wreath, I used a brown paint pen to finish it. I went around a second time to thicken the vines. This particular paint pen is oil-based, and I can't remember if I got it at Michael's or if I got it off of Amazon. Even though it's oil-based, it still dries pretty quick. Next, I started adding leaves using the spring wreath stencil. I tried both the Artist Loft Green Gold and Sap Green Permanent, but I suspected neither color would fully cover the brown with one layer. So I decided to mix some Liquitex Super Heavy Gesso with the Sap Green Permanent. The Super Heavy Gesso was opaque, so I only needed one layer to cover the brown paint. I mixed the Artist Loft Green Gold, Sap Green Permanent, and Gesso to create some different shades of green. Then I brushed the various shades on to create a more painterly look and some dimension. I'm applying and blending the different shades with the same brush. Since I ended up going over the leaves again to shade them, the Super Heavy Gesso was probably not necessary, but I do like the texture that it created. I used the Master's Touch Turner's Yellow from Hobby Lobby mixed with Super Heavy Gesso to add some wildflowers. This stencil is Bouquet of Flowers 1. After I dip the makeup sponge in the paint, I pounce it off. That's the key to getting crisp lines. Avoid adding too much paint all at once. I just kept shifting the stencil until the wreath was full of those little wildflowers. Then, like the leaves, I mixed a lighter and a darker shade of the yellow. Added some golden burnt sienna to get a darker shade and some gesso to get a lighter shade. Then again, I used a brush to apply the different shades over the stenciled images to get a more painterly look and to add dimension. Next up is the pumpkin. I'm using the Pumpkins Variety stencil. I started by adding a few pencil lines. I did that because I knew I wanted to fill the whole pumpkin with the base color once I lifted the stencil. So I wanted some guidelines to help me know where the different pumpkin sections would be when I started brushing on the paint. And you can see those little pencil lines peeking through the base layer. I used Artist Loft Professional Level Cadmium Orange and Yellow Orange Azo. I also used some of Golden's Yellow Ochre and Burnt Sienna to create different shades of orange and yellow. Now I'm adding the darkest shade over those pencil lines. I just kept working the brush in and out on each section with the different shades until each section looked rounded. It's easier to blend the paint if it's wet. If you find that the paint is drying too fast, try adding a little glazing medium to the paint. It extends the open time. Another way of saying that is it stays wet longer. I'm sure this took me a lot longer to paint than someone with more experience would have, but honestly, I was really enjoying the process and it felt really relaxing. I was surprised that it turned out as well as it did. I'd never painted a pumpkin before. As I was working on it, I started reflecting on why fall was my favorite time of year. I think it's because I have such fond family memories of Thanksgiving. December always seems so hectic, decorating, buying gifts, attending activities. November feels like the calm before the storm for me. My husband, children, and myself used to cook together for Thanksgiving. I have such fond memories of us all working together to create a huge meal while singing Christmas carols. Now, none of us are great cooks, and usually some ingredient might have been forgotten or something a little burnt, but that wasn't the point. It was just about taking time out of our busy schedules to enjoy being together. I didn't have this experience as a child, and I guess that's why it was so important to me as an adult. I hope it's a time of year my children will look back on and remember fondly as well. After the paint was dry, I went in with an extra soft charcoal pencil, then smeared the lines with a makeup sponge. Next, I added some color with my soft pastels. And that was the finishing touch it really needed. After I finished the pumpkin, I cut it out and added it at the base of the wreath. Next, I used the spring leaves stencil. I'd already stenciled on my base coat and was ready to add some highlights and shadows. I made 4 of these, cut them out, and added them at the base of the pumpkin. I wasn't worried about painting outside the lines because I was going to go back and trim this out with my scissors. After the paint was dry, I used my extra soft charcoal pencil again to add some details. I used some 3D foam tape in the center of the pumpkin and then adhered it down around the edges with my Aleene's tacky glue. Then I spent some time fussing with the leaves trying to figure out just where I wanted them. I ended up trimming them a little and spacing them out to fit around the florals. I used 3D foam tape behind the leaves as well to add dimension to my project. I got the little flowers from Michael's. I created these 2 little birds using stamps from Red Lead Paperworks. I stamped them with waterproof ink, colored them with watercolors, cut them out, and adhered them to my project with 3D foam tape and tacky glue. At this point, it felt like the wreath wasn't finished. So I grabbed my extra soft charcoal pencil and started adding some details. Lastly, I stenciled my title using Fall Words 1. After the paint dried, I cut the words out and adhered them to my canvas. Thanks so much for watching today's project. If you'd like to see more projects using Shawn's stencils, please join me over on my YouTube channel, Paperlicious Designs. See you next time!